Hi, hello, my name's Devraj, and I want to speak today about a new online school that I'm creating. I haven't got it all together in my head completely, but I'm nearly there, and I'll soon be starting to create content. And it'll be, a similar format to my existing school, the School of Body-Based Therapy, where there's online courses and then also like a chat group and reach out facility, online sharings and this kind of thing. And the main thing with this school is going to be more mystical in nature. It will include the body-based work, the breath work, the bioenergetics, this kind of thing. But it will also include some other fields because I've been engaged in mysticism and this kind of field tangentially over the last 25 years. And somewhere now it's time to create my own school and make it kind of easy access, relatively low cost, and basically decentralized. My plan is to create something like a 5-year course because it takes a while to get into this stuff. And the basic objective, it's kind of similar to my objective in therapy and working with clients in the body-based work, is to get you to a place where you have enough inner connection to continue on your journey yourself. And this is no small task in my opinion, having been around the therapy scene, particularly the deep therapy scene for some decades and, in and out of the mystical scene, it's clear to me that the overwhelming majority of people are kind of, going around, jumping in, jumping out, going in a bit of a circle, whatever. And they haven't quite made the kind of inner connection to lead themselves forwards. And that's not, that's not to make some negative statement about where people are at. It's just that it takes a while because we are in this world that is super distracting, and super challenging for many people, for myself, for much of my life, just to keep my head above water, to be able to survive and have a reasonable life was enough of a challenge, and to make any kind of, mystical spiritual progress, that was not really, I just wasn't in a place where I could do that. Now, this concept of getting to a place where you can really guide yourself or receive the guidance you need, that can take, depending on your kind of mental orientation, that can take different forms. For some people, in traditional esoteric schools, it's like getting a connection to the holy guardian angel. This was big for big old esoteric schools like the Golden Dawn or the OTO, the Crowley, Mathers, these kind of guys. Getting to a place where you got knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, which was like this idea you've got this personal guide inside. They're not really guardian in the sense of looking after you. They're more guardian in kind of kicking your ass a bit and moving you along and giving you the developmental challenges that you need to develop, basically. Another way you could see it, so that's one idea, you just get this connection to your holy guardian angel and then you're kind of on the road. Another way you could see this is like another concept from old alchemy days was the magnet of the wise, that you have this facility inside of you that's buried beneath lots of kind of, sludge around your third eye and your heart center. But you have this facility to attract the situations that you need into your life. Not necessarily to make you a load of money or to make you look cool or to get you a really sexy partner or this kind of thing, but to get the challenges that you need. But when this channel is more open, in a sense, it's more clear what you need. Things just jump out at you. I get this quite strongly. I don't really get holy guardian angel in terms of an angel kind of thing. I get a little bit of not really inner dialogue, but kind of strands and like a kind of red light, green light check-in facility. Is it time to do something like that? But mostly what I get is like, I'm just scanning through stuff in my daily life or looking at stuff online and something jumps out at me. It's quite clear these days. It sort of leaps at me, It's like I can't really miss it. So this is the magnet of the wise. It's also known in cognitive science as relevance realization. How you determine, from all the information that's going on in your life, what is relevant to you. It's a related concept from modern day kind of brain science. But the magnet of the wise or alchemical magnesia. Or another way, really, in fact, the best way in many ways is simply through self-awareness. Certainly, when I was in therapy for a long time, I had to clear just a lot of gunge out of my being and get tension out of my unconscious mind simply to come to a place of sufficient self-knowledge to see what I needed to do next. Where was I blocked? For a while, when I was on a kind of mystical journey and involved with a lot of deep therapy, particularly in the Osho scene, it was like, okay, you're going towards a guiding light somewhere. For a while it was like that, and at some point I realized that there was nothing I could do to really move forwards in a sense, because it isn't really a moving forwards, it's a moving in. But what I could do was take out the blocks. I could identify blocks within my own being, from how I respond socially, how I respond in my love life, just from mapping tensions in my body and this kind of thing, seeing how I get triggered by things in life. I could map out the blocks and find ways to clear the blocks, to get my energy a bit stronger. And this is like the journey of self-awareness, in a sense, having sufficient self-knowledge that you actually see the blocks. Because for a lot of us, and certainly for me, for the first 40 or so years of my life, I was in acute denial about the blocks. I was more like trying to project an image into the world that avoided contacting the blocks, avoided, the gaps inside my being. But as I got established with deep therapy and doing a lot of workshops and some really intense stuff, I started to understand this self-awareness thing. So this is also a way that we can guide ourselves. For me, for the last 5 years, I've been progressively working on areas of tension in my mid-upper spine, behind my heart center, which is where the heart closes from, and you're not really getting much mystical experience until you've got some level of opening in the heart center. I'll talk more about that stuff. Likewise, the third eye is kind of powerful at a certain point, but you need to get some lower body stuff going on first, or you'll just kind of spin out. You can go to all sorts of spiritual places in the world and find all sorts of spun out people. So this is what I mean when I said, get you to a place where you can move forwards yourself, where you're sufficiently grounded with within your own being. The inner doorways have started to open, because there are inner doorways. We don't have to just project our consciousness out into the world and keep looking for things. That's part of it. But there are also inner doorways. And when we can access them, there's this whole inner world inside. So that's the kind of objective of the school, over like a 4 or 5 year curriculum, slowly to get you to a place where, okay, now I can see myself on the inside, and I know where the blocks are for me personally, and I know how to move forwards and work with them. So let me now just chat a little bit about the kind of curriculum, so to speak, because mystical schools have all sorts of stuff that they do. And it's actually, for me, it's been very interesting to track down big mystical schools like the Golden Dawn or whatever and see what are they actually doing. Because one of the problems in mysticism is that people are very mysterious about it. And it's often not at all easy to divine just what a school is up to. The hierarchical structure of a school just makes this 10 times worse. Whatever school I ever create, it's going to be absolute minimum hierarchy. That is guaranteed. Because I'm 65 years old, I've been in the deep therapy and mystical scene for many decades, and there is no way you're going to do much when you have a big hierarchy, because the primate, the chimpanzee part of our brain just gets completely locked into this, and it just doesn't go anywhere, really. You might get a little bit of something, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So that's a little bit of a diversion, but basically the idea is to cover enough bases with the curriculum such that, you can get to this place where you get your holy guardian angel, the magnet of the wise, of the self-awareness, and you know how to move forward. So there's different kind of bases that I'll be using. One of them will be body-based therapy, because that's kind of where I came from. I was involved in Kabbalah before I got into the therapy scene, but I spent 20 years or so in body-based therapy, doing a lot and then teaching a lot. And one of the things I noticed whilst I was on that journey, it started off with a lot of Reichian stuff and understanding character structure and understanding traditional psychology and the unconscious. And actually, where I got to in the end with that journey, or where I got to lately with that journey, is simply feel your body more, basically. You don't, this whole mapping out of the unconscious, it's all okay, and all these kind of different ways that you can see yourself. It's useful, but also feel your body more is what it comes down to. If you simply expand the level of sensation, physical sensation that you have access to through breath work and through bioenergetics, first of all, you become healed. Because basically, what happens under trauma or conditioning, cultural conditioning that we go through, is that the sense of the body shuts down, particularly the sense of the back of the body. And when you open it up again, I started to heal, but then at some point I noticed I'm having mystical experiences here. This sensation of the body, as it expands, it starts to go into a kind of mystical domain. Where I was living for a long time was in an Osho community close to a city called Glastonbury, a town called Glastonbury, famous for spiritual stuff. It's all about chakras and crystals and all of these mental concepts. The last thing it's ever about is how much do you actually feel. Maybe in some parts of therapy, it's what is your access to emotionality, but underneath that even, all the emotions are actually embedded in your sense of the body. If you expand the sense of the body sufficiently, two things happen. An assortment of things happen. One, you become more healed. The energetic charge in your system from repression, from your nervous system, from your psychological defenses is gone. It's gone. It's worked out of your system. So this is not altering your consciousness all the time. You can be more grounded, often in very intense situations. Secondarily, when you expand the sense of the body and you get the repressed emotions out, your energy comes up. And energy is super important in esoteric work. I'll look at that also in more detail. But, when you look at the curriculum of, say, the Golden Dawn or something, and the use of, say, Enochian magic or God forms, and this kind of thing, a lot of that is to do with opening the body. Some mantra work is to do with opening the body and trying to get, the sensation level up, to try and get the level of energy that your body, if you imagine it as a vessel, can hold, to get it up. And a safer way to do that, to be quite honest, is via bioenergetics and breath work. So you get the energy up. Basically, you get the energy that you could hold in your system up. So that's one aspect of the course. Another aspect is to create a deep grounding in the subconscious mind. And that is done, I do that through tarot. If you maybe saw my book, Opening the Body with the Cube of Space, I introduced the concept there. I learned tarot and I was very attracted to it, not for divination or telling people when they're going to meet a tall, dark stranger or whatever, when they're going to get rich. Not for anything like that, not even for path working. I learned it with the builders of the Adytum back in the late 90s, early 2000s, from their correspondence course. They're a school in California. And, it was very, very, tarot was a very deep part of their course. In fact, they're the deepest school that I'm aware of for the tarot. And really, although it's not really articulated, it became very clear to me at some point that understanding the 22 tarot trumps, because that's what it's based around, the other keys you let go of, it's anchoring you. When you have the esoteric version and the best esoteric version you can get, which I use, it anchors your consciousness very deep, on a very deep level. And what this allows, it means you can start to dissolve your ego. And this is the core of any mystical path, as I said in the video the other day, to dissolve your ego. So also included in this course will be self-inquiry exercises where you directly investigate this sense of individuality that you have. It's in reality, it's kind of like a holding program. It's kind of like a holding program inside. And actually, you have inside of you a connection to a very deep place, deeper than even, some would say, even gods. But in order to get to that place, you need to be able to dissolve this sense of I-ness, which is constantly being reinforced by the culture around you. And you need to do it in a safe way. A safe way so that you can bring it back when you need it, but you can also dissolve it when you're on your own and allow yourself to get into this deep passageway, right inside yourself, right back to these kind of concepts of God. I'm not a great God believer myself, but that's a different story. So these will be the three kind of cornerstones, I think, of the practice, working with the tarot, learning how to take the symbols in and how to really impress them and activate them within your system. Working with body-based therapy, with bioenergetics, with long, deep breathwork techniques, stuff that that's my normal thing that I've been engaged in for years. And working with self-inquiry, working with how to investigate and start to dissolve this sense of I-ness inside. And added to that, I'll put in some other stuff. We'll also be looking at some mystical texts that I think are very important, particularly Liber Al, which I think has never been properly interpreted for various reasons. I'll look at in some videos. And with it, the concept of a new eon, of a changeover happening at this time to a whole new way of being. Also, maybe the Zohar is a good thing. Some of the early Rosicrucian documents I like to look at as well, from the early 1600s. The Zohar is a cornerstone mystical book of the Jewish tradition, and that's got some super interesting stuff in it. And what I love about the Zohar is it doesn't really do the tree of life. It does in a sort of symbolic, it just doesn't really deal with so many concepts. It won't, there is this thing in the Western tradition, and I have to, it's just like people just fixate on these structures. They fixate on the tree of life and the Sephiroth, and if you go here to here and here, and it's okay, there's validity in it, and you can do path working and stuff like this. But I love it that the Zohar, the absolute cornerstone mystical text in the whole Jewish canon, just doesn't even bother really mentioning the Sephiroth. Offhandedly it does, but it does that because it doesn't want you to get attached to these concepts. Because if there's one way to get hijacked on a spiritual path, it's to have a hierarchical structure and grades as well, which the Golden Dawn did both of, and that was just absolute poison pill, absolute poison pill. But it's part of how people were back in that time. So, I will avoid all that stuff. So whilst we might get into the Sephiroth a little bit, because it does have value as well, like I say, this path working thing and stuff like that, I'm very aware myself that it's so easy to get hopelessly identified to these things, and so many people in the Western esoteric tradition have done this. There hasn't been enough self-inquiry, they haven't started to dissolve the I, and they've got hopelessly attached to the structures that they've learned. So we will do a bit of tree of life and that kind of thing along the way, but I like to make it clear from the start, it's just not about filling your brain with more concepts. It's really, I function on minimal concepts, minimal beliefs, the absolute minimum you need, because basically we're chimpanzees with frontal lobes, and we will get hopelessly attached to these structures. And then the core of mysticism, as I've said, is being able to dissolve this sense of personal selfhood. And that's where the focus has to be. So for me on my own journey, I needed a certain level of beliefs and understandings. I needed a certain level of support and people around me who knew what, knew the structures were about. But once I got to a certain level and had made a certain level of progress, I no longer needed those things so much. And my objective is to get people to the same kind of place. Not to leave them stranded in concepts and building up this chimpanzee spiritual ego and all of this kind of thing. You don't need a load of books. I have virtually no books, either Kindle, another 5 or 6 old books over there, and you often go to these esoteric channels and you see the guy and he's kind of got a whole stack of books behind him. You won't see that with this kind of work. I'm very, very practical. As much as is possible, I will try to demystify things. And I will cover the bases that I believe you need to start having mystical experiences so that you can direct yourself. Another thing just to put in at the end here, because I'm a big fan of Liber Al, I'll talk a little bit about that, which is quite a channeled by Aleister Crowley, a notorious character, and also much misunderstood, a lot of which he created for himself, in my opinion. But it's also a book of the new eon. It's a book of the new eon. It's actually a kind of reset for the new eon, essentially what it is. It's not a long book. But what I really like about this is that it is bringing, an old eon to the end. And I feel like that is happening. When I look out into the world, and those of you who followed my work for a while, I've been into the futurism scene. I've been into AI, theories about is AI superintelligence from the future, Nicklandian kind of stuff, Gnostic Calvinism. I've been into all of that kind of thing, and I don't know the answers, but what's clear to me is that a lot of stuff is coming to an end right now. It's really coming to an end. And I imagine when I look at the world and how AI is developing, how capitalism is developing, how geopolitics is moving, we're coming into a new phase. And that probably hasn't happened for a couple of thousand years. So it's a big deal. And I think it's incumbent upon You know, those of us who've been in the scene a little while, I'm 65 now, to recreate things and present them in a new way, because how society looks is going to be different in the future. You know, it's going to be different. And how subjectivity looks, this is the really deep thing. We've been in this single kind of subjective perspective for the last couple of thousand years, you know, and that is going to shift. That's just clear to me when I see how AI is developing, how it's taking over areas of stuff previously allocated to the human frontal lobes. A lot of stuff is changing. And whilst that's scary, I'm certainly quite scared by it at times, it's also exciting. It's also exciting. And mysticism itself will be recreated, and I want to have my part in doing that. You know, I feel that's my role at the moment. So I don't have a name for this school yet, you know, but it will be something relating to the new eon. It will be relating to demystifying mysticism, and it will be a 4 or 5 year course that you can do online with support, you know, that really will give you enough so that you can get your own guidance, you get your own inner connection, you get access to your own inner world, and you can move yourself forwards. Thank you for watching this video. I'm sorry if it's been a little bit convoluted. Stay tuned to my channel for more announcements about the new school coming up in the near future. Thank you very much.